He did all the writing. I think it's interesting that Elmer Bernstein did the music for this thing. He became famous a few years later, or more famous a few years later, and I think he buried this in his resume. I'm not really sure he ever told anybody about it. But the credits don't lie, they were on the screen. So. It was a lot of fun. It was 4 or 5 days work. I got a check. It was a wonderful thing. And it cashed.
How did you get involved in it? How did you find your way into this movie?
Like any out-of-work actor, I was waiting by the phone and my agent called. You know? and I went and read for the part. It took about 20 minutes, and they said, "Okay, you'll do." And yeah, pretty much.
Do you know what? Yeah, and probably you weren't all involved. What went into the thinking for the appearance of the robot monster? You know, the gorilla suit with the diving helmet.
I don't know who figured out doing that. I've read it. There are, surprisingly enough, a few books about robot monsters floating around out there. A number really are. One of them is really in depth. It's about. I know you can't believe this, but it's like 700 pages. Yeah, and it is a complete treatise on the movie, how it was developed. Not much there about its success, however. In any case, it opened in Hollywood, I remember, with another movie called Run for the Hills. And the reviewer said, before you see Robot Monster, you might consider following the instructions in the title of the other movie. No, that's true story. True story. Now,
and you also had some appearances on The Adventures of Superman. Is that correct?
I was in one episode. It's now called The Stolen Elephant. It was during the color years. The first 2 or 3 years of The Adventures of Superman were in black and white. 2 years? Yeah. I have an expert sitting here, Dana Pless. In any case, there's some discussion about when it was that I did it. We moved out of Los Angeles area to Anaheim, and my career died. Not necessarily because I was terrible, which I was close to as an actor, but more because I could never make an interview. Going back up the Santa Ana Freeway in those days in the afternoon was a 2.5, 3-hour drive. Firestone Rubber and General Motors both had plants that sat right beside the freeway, and the shift changes were at 3, 3:15, 3:30. And if you didn't get out of school till 3 and got on the road at 3:15, you'd be lucky to be in LA by 6. And most casting directors weren't interested in sitting around for a juvenile player that late. Kids traditionally were interviewed in the afternoon unless it was in the summertime. But if it was during the school year, you had to go after school. And that's kind of why I think that I did the Superman in the summer of '54, but Jim Knoll seems to think, that runs the Adventures of Superman Club website, thinks it had to have been much later. He suggested I go back to my whatever annuals and school pictures I had to try to compare how I looked in one or the other. Mm-hmm. But I always thought that Superman was the last thing that I did, but it may not have been.
Yeah, memories of working on that, of working with the characters from the series.
In Superman? Yeah. Oh, I was fortunate to have scenes with all of the principals, with George both in costume as Superman and in his character as Clark Kent. It was a great set to work. The attitudes there was no backbiting. You didn't see any egos fighting with anybody. At least I didn't. And I had been around long enough at that point in time to know that those kinds of things can happen on a set. It was a lot of fun. Everybody did their job, you know, hit your mark, say your lines.
What was George like? Was he kind of like, welcoming you, or just like, okay, kid, you stand over there?
No, he was a prince. We did block a couple of scenes. The first one that I remember we didn't. For those of you that don't know the story, my mom and I were relatively poor, and we were hiding out because we didn't have any other place to stay, into an abandoned farmhouse. And Superman was looking for an elephant that had been stolen from a circus. And I guess his X-ray vision found it, and he landed into the scene. And as I said, we hadn't blocked the scene or rehearsed it at all. So, as I recall, in the scene, my mom and I are talking, and we hear the whoosh, Superman is arriving. And Superman jumps in off of the third step off a ladder. And I was startled. And I just blew the lines, and we had to shoot it again. I didn't know that was going to happen. I do remember that. It was kind of funny. The director was a little ticked. But I said, I didn't know it was going to come off the ladder. How did I know? Anyway.
Okay, I'm going to open up the questions. If we have questions out there in the audience, any questions? Oh, come on, folks. I know it's Sunday morning, but you folks are awake, right? Come on. No questions out there. Jesus. Okay, well, right here.
Any other movie roles outside of Robot Monster that you particularly enjoy doing?
Probably my favorite would be a film I did with Betty Hutton and Fred Astaire called Let's Dance. It was released in 1950. We shot it in 1949. It was actually, in a real way, my first role. I did have a walk-on part in one of my sister's movies a couple of years before that. Sharon is sitting here. I was going to say that. See, even that got more applause than Robot Monster. But it was a long film. Shooting schedule is, we began in March of 1949 and probably didn't finish with everything until, I want to say August. So not quite 6 months to put the film together. Some process stage work, a lot of singing and dancing. It's amazing to watch the talent that these people had. I had always admired Fred Astaire and the way he could move. And Betty was such a joy to work with. They were all helpful. They'd help me with lines. They saved me in a couple of scenes, I'm sure. But fun-wise, it was great. There's a scene in the movie where the story is a singer marries a guy in the Air Force, much to the chagrin of her mother, grandma, I guess. And he gets killed during the war. And so, but I was the result of their marriage. And so grandma, who is wealthy, Boston lady, decided that I would be much better off in her care than lounge singers could provide. And so I'm kind of the stone that the movie revolves around, who gets the kid? I don't know why they were fighting, but they were. In any case, there's a scene where I'm at grandma's house, and Betty sneaks in and tries to sneak me out. And we go down a trellis on the second floor, and we go down a trellis. Now, this was all on a set, so it wasn't really a whole house, but the trellis was real. So we go down, and she had me in a laundry bag, like a GI laundry bag, bow ties on it and everything. I'm in the laundry bag, fully dressed in the suit that Grandma had bought for me. We get down, and she's carrying me all the way down. I didn't weigh a heck of a lot, but you could hear her grunt carrying me down, and she never beefed about having to do it. And then we walked across the set, and there's a pond. Well, they stopped shooting before we went into the pond, and because the directors, somewhere along the line, they had screwed up. I had to wear the same suit in later scenes that hadn't been shot. But obviously, some of my clothing was going to get messed up going through the pond. So they stopped. That afternoon, we went to the department store where we got the original clothes, and they bought me a pair of size 9 shoes instead of the 5 or 6s that I wore, and a different pair of pants that would match, and went back, and we finished filming the scene that night from the point where we stopped, just about to step into the pond. And I did. I ruined the pants, and I ruined the shirt, or not the shirt, the shoes, and the socks, and all that. They all got soaked. But it was okay. Very strange stuff happens. Very strange. Anyway.
To back up a little bit, and one of the staffers was telling me this, he relayed this, and I didn't realize this, that apparently there was a 3D version of Robot Monster that was released.
It was originally released in 3 dimensions. He very much wanted to have the first commercial 3D film since the 20s. New processes had been developed. He got access to them. He knew that there's a film called House of Wax with Vincent Price that opened a couple of weeks after we did. So he beat House of Wax to the screen. Not that he deserved to, or that, but he did in fact. So that's really kind of the story.
And has this been discovered any place? Is this still around any place, this 3D version?
Oh, well, because it wasn't a resounding commercial success, 3-dimensional films in those days were filmed on 2 different reels. They used 2 cameras in theaters to show the film, to get the 3D effect. Well, because for 2 reasons. One, it wasn't a great commercial success, and 2, the vast majority of the country outside of California, maybe New York City, etc., LA and Chicago, had access to 3D theaters, theaters that were set up. So they sent the film out randomly, 1 reel at a time. They didn't care if it was an A side or a B side. And a fellow that I met a few years ago in the 90s was working in the catacombs, the film catacombs in New York City. And he was familiar with the film, and he knew that it had been done in 3D, and he's going through the catacombs, doing whatever he had to do, and he saw a copy of the A side. And he asked if he could take it home and see what kind of shape it was in. And they allowed him to do that, and it was a good print. And he said, and he went back and asked him, he says, "Do you mind if I hunt for the B-sides?" And nobody in the catacombs really understood that there were 2 sides. And they said, "Well, sure, yeah, go ahead." He knew how to identify the cans that they were shipped in. And he ultimately, about 4 or 5 months later, found a B-side. He found a couple before that were not in good shape, but he found one that was in real good shape. And they allowed him, I don't know if he purchased them. I think maybe he did, but not for a lot of money. And so after he had both copies together, he went and tried to find who had the rights. Wade Williams has the right to the film that you saw today. But there's a competing entity out there, and I'm not familiar with exactly who that is, but they've been fighting to the extent that the only thing you can see is the 2D version that you can get at Amazon. And anyway, he put together a team with a guy named Eric Kurland, who runs a business called 3D Space in Hollywood. And he had friends in the UCLA film department, and they developed a polarized 3D version of Robot Monster. And 2014, they showed it at the Egyptian Theater, across the street from Brown's Chinese, as part of, every year they have a 3D festival. And that film was featured that year, and they showed it and invited Claudia and I to be there, and we went. And it's beautiful. Beauty, you're dodging the bubbles when they come out of the bubbles. Yeah, straight from Lawrence Wilson, I guess. But I don't really know that that's true, but it would be a fair guess. If you go to IMDb, there is a company credited for providing the bubble machine, which I think is funny.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's in the credits too? Okay. As you might guess, I haven't watched this film a lot in my life. I never watched it as a kid. Our mother was totally against us seeing ourselves on the screen. I was never sure exactly why. I think she wanted us to not get big heads about the fact that we were on the screen. I think that was her principal reason. But neither Sharon or I, certainly while we were working, never got to see anything that we worked in. You didn't see anything until you were in your 20s?
Yeah, I was 19 in New York City.
Yeah.
I saw Body Snatchers with my boyfriend.
And she hadn't worked in 5 or 6 years at that point in time. And Mom, of course, was in LA, and she couldn't say, no, you can't go. I took a shot at going to see Let's Dance one time. It was going to be a Saturday afternoon movie actually it wasn't the kids movie. At the local theater, they had its kids show, where they showed Flash Gordon and Superman shorts and Black Hawk and all those things. But they had another theater as well. I told Mom I was going to go see the Bunnies. And I think it was 15 cents to get in the show. And she looked at the app after I left the house.
You're not a vampire.
I was going to see me. It was cool. And she saw that that Let's Dance was playing in the other theater. And she was
keep an eye on him.
He's going to go see the movie. He's going to do it. And you can't let him. And she drove down there and snatched me out of the line. Oh, seriously. Oh yeah. She wasn't terribly upset, not mean about it, but you can't go see yourself. You can't do that. And so I never did get the opportunity to see anything that I did while I was a kid. Never.
What have been some of the things you've been doing, post-acting career? I understand that you've actually had, some experience in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I spent 12 years working on the green felt tables of Vegas casinos, doing 21 and roulette and the Big Six. I wrote Keno for a couple of years. I worked in a lot of hotels. I worked in Stardust, Golden Nugget, downtown, the Mint, downtown, twice at Binion's Horseshoe, downtown. I worked at the Flamingo. I worked at the Dunes for quite a while. That was a great job. That was always a lot of fun. I like bouncing off of people and try to keep them smiling while they're losing their money. I had a few bad experiences, but nothing that obviously I didn't survive. So.
Did you have a specialty? Was there any particular game that you, or was it just a variety of things that you did?
I always preferred the deal the wheel, roulette wheel. It's a great game. Requires some concentration. You have to pay attention, especially if the game's busy. You have to learn how to protect it. I was fortunate to have been taught by, in those days, this is the late 60s, a lot of casino workers from Cuba had migrated to Vegas when Castro took over in Cuba. And a fellow named Izzy Falcone probably the greatest wheel dealer I ever saw. Trained me. He was amazing and a great help in